An FA-18 Super Hornet, loaded with classified avionics and armed for a combat mission, has just hit the Arabian Gulf and sunk to the seafloor. The crew ejected safely, but that aircraft is sitting in waters routinely patrolled by Iranian naval forces. And every hour it stays down there, the odds of keeping that technology out of hostile hands gets worse. The aircraft is inverted, 190 feet down, partially buried in the silt. The weapons on its wing stations went through a high-speed ocean impact, and nobody knows which ones are still live. Before anyone can touch the wreckage, someone has to go down and find out. At that depth, nitrogen narcosis sets in. It's like being slowly administered anesthesia while someone hands you a wrench and asks you to do precision work. And that is the easy recovery. The hard one sits twice as deep in the Pacific, and there's only one way to reach it. Within hours, the Navy's deep salvage machine switched on. On the deck of the support vessel, the dive team staged their surface-supplied rigs, helmets hard-lined to the ship by umbilical hoses carrying breathing gas, voice comms, and depth telemetry. A dive supervisor topside monitors every breath and every word in real time. If a diver sounds confused or slurs a status report, the supervisor can order them pulled up immediately. This is not a strap a tank on your back and jump on in recreational diving. These divers don't get to make their own mistakes. Meanwhile, the crane ship moved into position over the crash coordinates. Support boats established a perimeter. The whole operation had to be staged, sequenced, and ready to execute before a single diver hit the water. Because once they go down, the clock starts running against them in ways most people never think about. But before any salvage diver could touch the wreckage, someone else had to go down first. The EOD technicians descended on the first dives. Those munitions on the wing stations had just crashed with high speed into the ocean, followed by a 190-foot plunge to the seabed. And impact forces do unpredictable things to weapons. Fuses can partially arm. Rocket motor casings can crack. Warhead housings can deform in ways that completely change their sensitivity. The EOD divers approached the wreckage methodically, identifying each weapon station, checking arming pins, safety mechanisms, and fuse conditions one by one. They were rendering safe ordnance that minutes earlier had been loaded to drop onto a target. In the same murky water where they could barely see their own hands, working partly by touch on an airframe mangled beyond recognition. Every weapon's condition was documented for investigators because the ordnance state also tells a story about how the jet hit the water, the angle, the speed, the forces the airframe absorbed on impact. Only after every hard point was cleared did EOD give the green light for the salvage dive to begin. Every hour this took was another hour Iranian patrol boats had to get curious about the surface activity. Now the salvage team could actually touch the aircraft, but touching it and pulling it off the seafloor are two very different problems. At 190 feet on compressed air, nitrogen narcosis sets in, and it doesn't announce itself politely. It creeps, dulling your judgment, thickening your fingers inside the gloves, convincing you that everything is fine when it absolutely is not. Divers compare it to slowly being administered anesthesia while someone hands you a wrench and asks you to do precision work. Now imagine that precision work is threading a steel shackle through a crumpled wing spar in water you can barely see through. That is what 190 feet buys you. On top of the narcosis, every minute on the bottom accumulates decompression obligation. Stay down too long and nitrogen saturates your tissues. Rush the ascent and that nitrogen forms bubbles in your joints, your spinal cord, and your brain. The mild version puts you in a hyperbaric chamber for hours. The bad version paralyzes you. The worst version is a body bag. So the teams rotate in tight windows, one pair working the wreckage, one pair on the ascent line making staged decompression stops, one pair on the surface gearing up. All the real work gets done in short, intense bursts between mandatory ascents. Every useful minute on the bottom costs minutes of decompression on the way back up. The jet had hit the water at speed, sunk, and come to rest inverted, partially buried in silt. The divers identified structural hardpoints, wing carry-through structures, engine mount frames, landing gear attachment fittings, anything originally engineered to handle significant loads. Working in near-zero visibility, they threaded slings and heavy shackles around these points and connected lift wires to a central pick point for the crane hook. So why not just wrap the whole thing in a cargo net and winch it up? A crumpled fighter jet is not a crate of MREs. It has jagged, torn edges, structural members sticking out at random angles, and aluminum skin panels that will peel right off under tension. A net catches on all of that, bunches up, and puts force exactly where you don't want it. One panel tears loose mid-lift, and suddenly your classified avionics package is doing a solo dive back to the seafloor. Rigging to known structural hardpoints gives the team control over exactly where every pound of force goes. And they needed to get it right the first time, because the longer a crane ship sits stationary over a crash site in the Arabian Gulf, the more attention it attracts. Now with the line secure and the crane ship positioned overhead, the operator takes the strain gradually, letting the slings equalize. But two physics problems hit at once. First, sea state. The ship is rolling and heaving on the surface while the load sits static on the bottom. Every wave pulses force through the cables that can double or triple the load for a split second. Second is suction. A heavy object sitting on a silty bottom creates a vacuum effect against the seafloor. The breakout force, the force needed to just unstick the wreckage from the floor, can spark far higher than the object's actual weight. And the moment it breaks free, the load lightens suddenly, and the crane has to compensate instantly or the whole thing swings like a wrecking ball and fouls the rigging. With every line holding the crane taking a steady strain, the Super Hornet rose through 190 feet of Arabian Gulf, streaming seawater. Then it hit the surface and got heavier. Underwater, the airframe had buoyancy assistance. The instant it cleared the waterline, the crane took the full dead weight. The jet came up inverted and was guided onto wooden pallets on the deck. Except what landed on those pallets was not a whole fighter jet. It was roughly half of one. The airframe had broken apart, either upon initial impact with the water or during the lift itself. Classified avionics modules, weapons system components, and structural fragments were still scattered across the Gulf floor. The clean single lift just became a scavenger hunt. Divers went back down to sweep the crash site, locating and recovering every piece they could find. In these waters, that's not a theoretical exercise in thoroughness. Iranian naval forces actively patrol the area, and Tehran has a documented track record of recovering and reverse engineering American military hardware. They have built entire drone programs off of captured U.S. equipment. Every fragment left on that seafloor was a potential intelligence gift to a government that would love nothing more than to pick apart American avionics at their leisure. The full site sweep took far longer than the primary lift, but when the operation was complete, investigators had the engine failure data, the structural evidence, and the confidence that hostile hands had not gotten there first. One recovered jet, even in pieces, fed maintenance data back across every Super Hornet still flying combat sorties off every carrier in the fleet. The FA-18 recovery was brutal, but the ocean was cooperating. The depth was survivable. The bottom was accessible. Human hands could do the work. Take all three of those away, double the depth, and put the only evidence that could shut down a negligent airline inside 60,000 pounds of crumpled fuselage sitting on a shelf above the deep Pacific, and you get a recovery that almost didn't happen. On July 2, 2021, 1:45 in the morning, Hawaii time, a Boeing 737-200 cargo freighter operating as Transair Flight 810 lifts off from Daniel K. Inouye International Airport in Honolulu. 2 pilots, no passengers, and a belly full of cargo. Captain Henry Okai, 58 years old, and First Officer Gregory Ryan are in the cockpit. The aircraft is 46 years old. The right engine is 53, built in 1968 when the Vietnam War was still raging and the Boeing 737 had been in service for less than a year. Seconds after liftoff, a thud reverberates through the airframe, followed by vibrations and a long, sickening whoosh. The right engine's high-pressure turbine has shed 2 blades. Decades of operating in Hawaii's salty, humid air have corroded the load-bearing cross-sections until they could no longer handle the full-power takeoff. The engine is failing, and then it gets worse. Captain Okai misidentifies which engine is failing. He feeds power to the bad right engine, does not increase thrust on the good left engine. Within minutes, both pilots believe neither engine works. Low altitude, open ocean, total darkness. 11 minutes after takeoff, they ditched the 737 into the swelling waters of Mamala Bay in complete darkness. The aircraft hits the surface, breaks in two, and sinks. Both pilots escape and are pulled from the water alive. But the question that would keep investigators up at night was not whether the pilots made mistakes. It was whether anyone had given them a fair chance to begin with. That answer could prevent this from happening again. The corroded turbine blades, both black boxes, and every scrap of physical evidence are sitting on the Pacific Ocean floor, degrading by the hour. The Pratt & Whitney JT-8D engines that powered this 737 are still flying on cargo aircraft across the Pacific. If those cracked blades represent a corrosion failure pattern common to every JT-8D operating in tropical saltwater environments, then every day this wreckage sits unstudied is another day an identical engine could shed the same blades on another flight. The NTSB deployed 10 investigators to Oahu immediately. They needed the blades to confirm the corrosion theory. They needed the flight data recorder to prove which engine was actually producing power. They needed the cockpit voice recorder to reconstruct the crew's decisions second by second. All of it was sitting in salt water at 350 to 450 feet, 2 miles off Iwa Beach. Transair's insurer contacted the Bold Horizon, a research vessel out of San Diego carrying a work-class ROV built for depths where human divers physically cannot operate. For heavy lifting, a separate crane barge, the Salta Verde, would handle loads beyond the ship's capacity. On October 12, Bold Horizon departed Honolulu with 2 NTSB investigators, 2 Boeing engineers, and a full recovery crew. First order of business once on site, map the debris field. Bold Horizon towed a side-scan sonar, a torpedo-shaped sensor that glides above the seafloor, emitting fan-shaped pulses of sound in wide swaths. When those pulses hit the wreckage, the sound reflects differently than it does off flat sand. The returns paint a picture on the operator's screen, bright shapes with dark acoustic shadows behind them. The shadow's size tells you the object's height. The shape tells you what it probably is. A long cylindrical return with mounting structures, that's an engine. A broad angular shape with internal voids, a fuselage section. By the time the passes were complete, the team had a full acoustic map of every piece of the 737, its exact position, and the order in which they would bring it up. Engines first. They were the primary evidence. The ROV descended 400 feet. No human diver was following it down. Remember what nitrogen narcosis did to the Navy divers at 190 feet? Double that depth and the effect is not twice as bad. It's completely incapacitating. A diver breathing compressed air at 400 feet would not be impaired. They would be useless. Saturation diving can technically get humans to this depth, but it means living inside a pressurized chamber, breathing helium-oxygen mixtures, and spending days decompressing after every work cycle. For a job that's going to take weeks and dozens of individual lifts, you don't send people. You send a robot that doesn't get narked, doesn't get tired, and doesn't care that the water pressure down there would crush a car can flat. You just need someone good on the joystick's topside. Through the cameras, the surface team got their first look at the debris field. The 737 was in 2 major sections, forward fuselage torn from aft on impact. Both JT-8D engines still attached to wing stubs, cargo containers, and smaller debris scattered across the shelf. The ROV pilot positioned alongside the right engine, the one that started the entire chain of events. The manipulator arms, hydraulic with multiple degrees of freedom, reached for a pre-staged steel cable from the ROV's tool basket. Here's the challenge nobody talks about. The pilot is threading that cable through engine mounting structures using 2 robot arms and a camera feed from 400 feet above. There's no depth perception from a single camera lens. None. Every movement is a judgment call about distance and angle made from a flat video image on a monitor aboard a rolling ship. If the cable slips off a corroded mount point, the pilot repositions the entire vehicle and starts the whole process over. It's surgery performed with boxing gloves through a television screen while someone gently rocks your operating table. Both engines and the nose gear were rigged, lifted, and ashore by October 17th, 5 days from departure. The Pratt & Whitney turbofans were crated for mainland shipment and a full supervised teardown, blade by blade. Bold Horizon went back out on October 18th. The forward fuselage, 37 feet long, about 15,000 pounds, came up on October 20th via Salta Verde crane barge. Challenging, but manageable. Then came the monster. The aft fuselage, 63 feet long, 48,500 pounds empty. But it wasn't empty. 4 cargo containers were still inside, pushing total weight past 60,000 pounds. Wings and tail still attached, both structurally compromised from impact. Boeing's engineers were aboard specifically for this moment, because this lift could tear the wreckage apart if the load distribution wasn't surgical. And here's why this lift was non-negotiable. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were both inside the aft fuselage. If the section broke up and those recorders dropped off the shelf into deeper water, the investigation loses the only evidence that could prove what the crew actually did in those final 11 minutes. So why not just send the ROV down, grab the black boxes, and call it a day? Because those recorders are mounted deep inside the fuselage, behind access panels that were almost certainly crushed or blocked by impact debris. The ROV's manipulators are strong, but they don't have the dexterity to excavate inside a collapsed cabin at depth. The only play was to bring the entire 60,000-pound section up in one piece. The ROV operators spent hours threading cables through precise structural attachment points, distributing the load so no single connection bore too much weight. The Salta Verde took the strain. Foot by foot, 60,000 pounds of crumpled Boeing rose through 400 feet of Pacific Ocean. The wings flexed under changing hydrodynamic forces. The surface team watched the ROV cameras for any sign of structural failure. A crack propagating along a spar, a skin panel starting to peel, a cable cutting through corroded aluminum. If the wing sheared off, the entire center of gravity shifts and the section rolls, snapping its rigging, and drops. It broke the surface on October 31st. Both black boxes were intact. Every major component of Transair Flight 810 had been recovered from the ocean. But here is what the investigation uncovered that turned a single accident into something far bigger. Captain Okai had experienced 5 engine failures while flying 737s for Transair. 5. High exhaust gas temperatures on takeoff, readings that should alarm any crew, were so routine that pilots treated caution range indications as normal. Think about that. The warning lights came on so often that the crews just stopped treating them as warnings. The FAA had already been investigating Transair for maintenance deficiencies before Flight 810 ever left the ground. That investigation began in 2020, a full year before the crash. After the ditching, Transair grounded its 737s for 1 week. Then the FAA revoked their inspection authorization entirely, citing pre-existing deficiencies. Transair's 737 operations were finished permanently. The wreckage recovery did not just solve one accident. It confirmed a pattern of systemic neglect that regulators had been circling for over a year and provided the physical evidence to shut it down for good. Bye for now.